Can you take two whiskeys that you bought at the store, or maybe even three, put them together and make a better whiskey? Take A and B that are good, put them together, and you make C that is just amazing. Is that possible? That is the topic of today's episode. Spoiler alert, if you haven't caught on because I'm doing an entire episode about it, my thought is yes. My answer to that question is yes. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about it a little bit more in depth here. First, before I get to that, I do want to ask you to go check out the Patreon in the description down below if you enjoy this show and if you want to see it continue every week. This show is a lot of work, but it is so well worth it from the patron support. And I have to say, I could not produce the show without the support of the patrons. It means the world to me. I can't thank you guys enough, and we're working on a ton of fun stuff over there. We've got barrel picks coming up. Some patrons should be joining me on this first barrel pick. Meetups, virtual meetups, in-person meetups, bonus episodes of this podcast. I do specific types of episodes. I do a blind tasting where I take some of my favorite whiskeys and I put them to the test and make a whole podcast episode out of it. So please consider going and checking that out down in the description below. And thank you all so much who already do support through the Patreon page. I want to keep that momentum going, and I'm so thankful for you guys. Okay, let's get into blending though, and kind of how I got to where I am with blending right now, because I'm in this weird place now where sometimes I feel like I'm the only one that that realizes how much fun it is. I feel like I look around and people like don't really care that much. I think people I talk to who consume the content, like people who watch the videos and things, definitely care and think it's cool. But like I'm surprised I don't see more content creators talking about home blending. I don't see more podcasts really talking about it. I know why brands don't talk about it, and we're going to get into that here in a minute. But yeah, anyhow, so how did I get to where I am, where I'm like, I don't know, I'm like obsessed with home blending, and I feel like nobody else understands how much fun I'm having with it. Where I am is, it all started with Poor Man's Pappy, okay? So if you haven't heard of Poor Man's Pappy, it's this old recipe where it originally, I'm from looking online, people make it sound like it was not made to be Pappy. It was made to be something entirely different. But then people were like, well, it tastes like Pappy, so we're going to call it Poor Man's Pappy. And basically what it is you take 60% of Weller 107 and 40% of Weller 12 year. So 60%, if you've heard of Weller Antique or Weller Red, Weller 107, that's 60% of it. And then 40% Weller 12 year. That's the black label Weller. You take those, you mix them at that ratio, and you get something that tastes roughly like Pappy. Now, I haven't had the whole Pappy lineup. I've had Old Rip, which some people don't even count as Pappy, and I've had Pappy Van Winkle 15, Pappy 15, and I really enjoyed both of them, and I can see the parallels. Okay, so Weller's made from the same recipe, the same mash bill as Pappy Van Winkle. It's just different barrels. So different barrels, different ages, those sorts of things. So I can understand the similarities, and I actually think it tastes pretty similar. I know some people don't. Some people don't like the recipe, and they're like, this isn't Pappy. It's not going to taste exactly like Pappy, but it tastes kind of like Pappy, and it's way cheaper. So I digress. That's what got me into blending, though. That was where this whole journey kind of started with me, because I had Poor Man's Pappy, and then I thought, I want to try to come up with something better, because Weller Antique and 12 year are both hard to find now. Like I'm in Ohio, so I'm lucky enough I can find antique sometimes. But 12 year, even in Ohio, is like impossible to find. So you got to come up with something. I wanted to come up with something that wasn't so hard to find. So I was like, well, what if I started taking whiskeys that at least aren't like super rare? Maybe they're like, I use Middle West, which is like a slightly smaller distillery, but they're pretty well distributed now. And I'm like, maybe I'll use some craft brands that aren't the best distributed, but at least it's not like rare or hard to find. Like if you go online, you can probably get your hands on it, right? And I wanted to do that, and I also wanted to keep it cheap. I didn't want to be blending two bottles that are each $100, and then it's like, what's the point at that point? It's still a lot cheaper than Pappy, but you get the idea. So I started doing that, and I actually made an Instagram series out of it where I was like, okay, we're going to try these different recipes and see if they're better or worse. So I took Poor Man's Pappy and I put it up against a recipe, and I think the first one lost, and I put it up against another one. That one won, and so then I took that one that won, and I called it Smart Man's Pappy, or at least version number 1 of Smart Man's Pappy. And then I kept trying to improve that. So then I put the Smart Man's Pappy up against a new challenger, and every time the challenger won, it became the new Smart Man's Pappy. Now, fast forward probably a month and a half, probably 2 months at this point. maybe even 3 months. Wow, time flies. Fast forward about 3 months, and I've done a few different versions of it. There's probably, I think there's 3 that won, and I made a YouTube video about that. So I did make a YouTube, if you're really interested in the smart man's pappy portion of things, I did make a YouTube video specifically about that. It's not a podcast, it's just like a horizontal YouTube style video. So go check that out. I think I haven't released it yet, but it's probably going to be called The Best Alternatives for Pappy Van Winkle, I think is probably what that's going to be called. Something like that. So go to the Whiskey Noobs YouTube channel and you can find it. But if you want to hear more about that, go that route. But the point being, it got me down this rabbit hole where I started really trying to improve and really trying to make ones taste better. And I even have one that I think tastes really close. In the YouTube video, I do a blind tasting, and not to spoil everything, but I think this one's really close to Poor Man's Pappy. If not better, but maybe not as much tasting like Pappy Van Winkle. And so I've made all these better versions, and I'm like, this is really fun. And so then I'm like, well, what if I just make blends that like are just meant to taste good? And so that is kind of where I started just getting into home blending. Now, what I mean when I say home blending is, I mean you take 2 different, like whiskeys that are completely done. When I say, I almost said finished, but I don't want you to think I mean like finished in different barrels. I just mean complete products that you buy off the shelf. You take them, you blend them up, you try to make something that tastes better than the sum of its parts. So with Poor Man's Pappy, you're taking Weller, and you're taking Weller Antique and Weller 12 year, you're putting them together, and you're making something that tastes better than Antique and better than 12 year. And I actually did a blind tasting where I found that, at least for my palate, Poor Man's Pappy does taste better than Antique and then 12 year. That's the main idea. And I realized, like, you can like pick vibes that you want to go for, aesthetics that you want to go for. Like, oh, I want this to kind of taste like this. And then like look at your shelf and be like, what do I have that might help achieve that flavor? And it's a ton of fun. And so I have to pause here because I have to say something, and I want to be careful about how I say it. I have the utmost respect for everybody involved in this. So I found this, I came across this clip while I was scrolling on Instagram, and it's from the Bourbon Pursuit podcast. Absolute utmost respect for those guys. I've met them in person, fantastic people. And also for the people who were speaking on the podcast. So they had a couple guests on, and one of them was Cine Bourbon, Cine Bourbon. Go follow him. Fantastic content, right? A ton of respect for him. But I do have to say, so he said something that I very respectfully, strongly disagree with. So, and I also should say that I am not under any kind of disillusionment that this was directed at me or about me or anything like. I don't mean it like that. I just mean the thing that he said I strongly disagree with. So he basically said that he had heard from a distiller, and the distillers told him this, and it stuck with him, and he's like, yeah, that's so true. That people like to do home blends, like Poor Man's Pappy, he even used it as an example, and think that they're doing like blending, think that they're being a blender. And I wrote down a couple of the main points that he said. So like the first is, you're not a blender, you're blending finished products. Because you're blending things that you bought off the shelf. The second thing was, and don't go doing a 3-hour TikTok live about it, because you're not a blender. You can geek out about it with your friends if you want, but you're not a blender. Don't go doing a big TikTok live about it. And so here's the thing. And so I fully respect that opinion, and I can understand where they're coming from. Here's the thing. I agree that you are not a blender because you're blending finished products. I staunchly disagree with the don't go do a 3-hour TikTok live about it, because home blending is definitely a different thing than what a master blender at a distillery is doing. But home blending is still a thing, and it's still a ton of fun. And I understand that you're not doing the same thing as a master blender, but you're still blending. So a master blender is taking barrels that have yet to become a product. Some of them have different finishes. Some of them just have different flavors from where they are in the rick house. It depends on what it is that they're doing, what it is that they're blending. And they're blending those together and coming up with a blend. And then maybe they proof that blend down to a certain proof. They find where it's the best at. And then they release it as a certain thing, right? There's a lot that goes into it. Utmost respect for master blenders. I think they're a master at their craft because, the name master blender. But what you're doing at home is you're taking different bottles that have different flavors and you're blending them together. And those bottles a lot of times have already been proofed down, sure. But like whiskey already has some amount of water in it, no matter what, whether it's at cask strength or whether it's been diluted with external water. There's different compounds involved, absolutely. But you're in essence, like if you want to make it like philosophical, like ontologically, to use a big word, you're kind of doing the same thing, right? Now, you're not as skilled as a master blender. I'm not as skilled as a master blender. I'm nowhere near the skill of a master blender. And I have tons of blenders to prove it. And that's what makes it fun for me. But you're kind of doing the same thing, right? So I want to be clear that I have the utmost respect for everybody involved in that podcast, and as well for whatever distiller it is that said this, because here's the thing. I can understand where the distiller is coming from. And I don't know if this is their motivation. I don't even know who it is that initially said this. But I know that distilleries tend to not promote it too much. I know Old Forester has really embraced home blending, which I think is awesome. But distillers don't talk about it too much. And I suspect that a motivation for that is if I can buy $30 bourbon A and $35 bourbon B, and I can make a bourbon that I like so much that I would drink it over $50 bourbon C, then that's money coming out of the distiller's pocket because you're getting more of bourbon C rather than buying the expensive bourbon, right? So I can understand if that is the motivation for a distiller. But as a content creator and as a whiskey consumer myself, and to all content creators across the board, I also think, and this is going to be a little soapboxy, I also think that we have a duty to the people consuming our content, the people supporting us and liking our content, to give them the best bang for their buck. And if that is taking two cheap whiskeys and making a whiskey that does not taste cheap, then that's what we do. I mean, that's what I'm all about. Like, that's how I got started, was with budget bourbons. And hey, don't buy these expensive bourbons, buy these budget ones instead. That's what I'm all about. And so the moral of the story is, I support all of my distillers, and I want people to buy their well-blended, amazing stuff, and it should be better than anything you can blend at home, right? But maybe it's not. And I have the utmost respect for distillers, but as a content creator, my duty is to the people consuming my content. If you pay me for a promotion, my duty is to you. I totally am behind you there. But at least in terms of the people supporting me, the people on my Patreon, the people liking my posts, sharing my posts, my duty to them is to give them the best content, to give them something they can actually use at home. So I told you I was going to get a little soapboxy, and I did. But the moral of the story is, okay, it's not the same thing that a master blender does because you're using finished product. Okay. And like that's how I would follow it up. And what? I'm using a finished product. I'm using 2 different, 3 different, 4 different types of whiskey, blending them together and getting something different. A blender at a distillery is using 2 different, 3 different, 4 different types of whiskey. Of course, there are different stages in the process. There's differences. I get it. But I don't know why that means we shouldn't consider home blending to be an awesome hobby that people take part in. So I'm going to say this one last time, then we're going to move on from here. I can't say this enough. Utmost respect for everybody involved. And also, all I saw was a little clip taken out of context. I don't know if they agreed with that, disagreed with that. I can understand why you would agree with that. But I take the opposite stance. So I know that in today's society, it's hard for people to respectfully disagree. I am with the absolute most respect, just disagreeing with that stance. And I don't want to put that on Bourbon Pursuit because, once again, it was a guest on their show that said this. I don't know if they agree with it or disagree with it, and I don't suspect any bad motivations. The vibe of the clip was very much that it was just kind of a off-the-cuff thing that they it just kind of came up in the podcast. So I'm not trying to make a bigger thing out of it than it needs to be, but that's my honest and true opinion about it. And once again, whether or not it's where it came from, distillers do have an incentive to stop you from home blending because then you're not going to be buying as many of their products. Okay, so you can also, the other thing I have a note in here, you can also blend cask strength unfiltered whiskey, which is then you're doing very much almost the same thing, right? You're not taking it out of barrels and blending them, but you can take 2 cask strength, not filtered, uncut, unfiltered whiskeys and put them together. And that's blending, man. So anyways, I wanted to establish that, and then also I want to talk a little bit about the different types of blending that distilleries do. So distillers do, once again, they're using barrels usually. They're not using finished products, of course. They also might have different finishes. So they might take one that's finished in a port barrel, one that's finished in a cognac barrel, and one that's not finished at all, and put them together to get different flavors, which you can also, of course, do at home. So there are subtle differences, and I don't want to disrespect the art form that is master blending at all, because I am not under any kind of delusion that I'm nearly as skilled as your average run-of-the-mill master blender. Okay, I want to be clear about that. Okay, I think I've paid enough homage to that, but that is the motivation for this episode, because I thought, of course, I don't have nearly as big of a voice as that podcast does, and also I don't want that attitude to grow in the community of consumers, because I don't want the consumer to feel not empowered to blend at home. I want everybody to know you can blend at home and you can make something awesome. And you can make a lot of things that are disgusting and terrible, but you can make something awesome, and that's what's so much fun. So let's talk about home blending, because it is so much fun. So enough of the dreary sadness. Maybe I'll have to cut some of that out. I got a little bit rambly, but I just think it is actually truly important, because not only is it so much fun, it also really helps with overcoming the kind of slumps that you get in a hobby, like where you're a little bit bored and, oh, I bought this bourbon, I thought it was going to be phenomenal, and it's just okay, and you kind of get into this slump. Home blending is like limitless possibilities. It's so much fun. It's like if you are the type of guy who liked a science experiment, type of guy or gal in chemistry class who liked throwing different things together and seeing what happened, or who liked taking two different foods and putting them together and seeing what they tasted like that's what it is. It's so much fun. It's like a science experiment, and you can make ones that taste better, and you can make ones that taste super unique. So how do you get started? If you want a home blend, hopefully I've sold it enough here that some of you are like, okay, I want to try some home blending. So here's this is just my process. This is just what I do, and then I've got a few tips afterward that I think will help. But this is just the way that I think works pretty well. So the way I get started with it, usually it is staring at my selection, and I think to myself, what flavor am I going for? There's kind of two different ways I'll start. The first way is this. It's what flavor am I going for? So for a while, I was chasing down a Bananas Foster recipe. I was like, I want a bourbon that will taste like Bananas Foster, or even a whiskey, even if I had to use non-bourbon components. And I couldn't get it. It ended up horrible. The flavors did not work out together. But you go for a target flavor. You pick what it is that you want. And then you say, okay, what do I have that can get me close to that target flavor? The flip side of that coin is you can look at what you have and then say, okay, what do I have that has a unique flavor to it, that has something that doesn't just taste bourbony, or it doesn't just taste barrely, or whatever? What do I have that has something unique? And then pick those unique ones and say, okay, which of these could I put together in different proportions to make something extra unique, to make something extra special? So I did a couple different recipes from different perspectives. I did the first type. I did I'm trying to find Bananas Foster, and I couldn't make it work. I did a different one that was like banana nut, and it didn't get me banana nut, but it did get me pecan pie, and I'm actually going to talk about that blend here in a second. So sometimes just by going in a direction, you'll get that direction. You won't get what you finally were going for, but you'll get that direction. And then I also did the flip side of that, where I saw a couple whiskeys, and I knew I had one that had this strong red fruit note to it. And I knew that I had another one that was finished in a honey barrel, and I'm like, fruit, honey, those are going to work, right? And so then I did a blend, and that one worked as well. So you can go from both directions. Or you can also just take whiskeys that you like. You can just say, I really like this one, I really like this one, let's put them together and see what happens, right? You can also just take ones that you don't like. So that's a fun one. Like, I don't like this, I don't like this. Maybe I put them together and it makes something I like. Or maybe I put this one that I don't like with one that I really like, and maybe it makes something that I do really, really like. It's fun. You can do little things like that. The big thing is, I would always start with a 50-50 ratio unless one of them is completely overwhelming compared to the other. And you want to account for proof a little bit like that as well. If you've got a cask strength and an 80 proof, you might want to put more 80 proof and a little less cask strength. But think about it like that. And I like to just start with 50-50. And sometimes one of them totally overwhelms the other, and that's when you adjust the ratio. And then that is the most important thing is when you're doing this, track the ratios. Keep track. Am I talking about, I usually, like I said, I start with 1-to-1. Maybe I just eyeball it. So I do half a shot of this and half a shot of that, and it's just kind of eyeballing it. You can also, I do have props today. You can also, if you're watching the video version, you're seeing this guy right here. You can use one of these. This has the unfortunate name that is called a jigger. And as unfortunate as the name is, that is the real name. And you can use them for cocktails. You've probably seen this before, even if you don't own one. And it has, like, this is a slightly nicer one you can get off Amazon, which I got specifically because it has all these nice markings in it. And so you have markings in the top half. I'm trying to read them, but the lighting in here is not great. 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce, 3/4 of an ounce, and 1 ounce. And then if you flip over to the top, you have 1.5 ounce and 2 ounce. And so you can get ratios that way. So if you are unfamiliar with ratios, if you go 1/2 ounce of this and 1/2 ounce of that, that's a 1-to-1 ratio because you're using the same amount of both. If you do 1/4 ounce of this and 3/4 of an ounce of that, you're doing a 1-to-3 ratio because you have 1 part of the first thing and 3 parts of the next thing. So keep track of your ratios, whatever is the easiest for you. Maybe just base it all on an ounce and just write down, okay, I did 1/4 ounce of this and 1/2 ounce of that and 1/4 ounce of this third thing, whatever. But keep track of them because it's like a good recipe. When you find a good one, you don't want to forget it. Track your ratios and use something to measure them. Once you get that far, like I said, I usually try a first one that's an eyeball, and if it's pretty good, then I'll try to zero in on it. But if I try one that's an eyeball and it's just terrible, then I just don't even bother. Okay, so a couple of tips to get you as you're getting started here. The first one, the big one that I said, keeping track of the ratios. That should have probably been under tips and not under getting started, but that's a tip. The second tip that I have to give you, 2 + 2 sometimes equals 12. What do I mean by that? I guess you could interpret that as sometimes something's way better than the sum of its parts, which is true. But actually what I meant to say by that is sometimes 2 + 2 equals cat. And what I mean by that is, you take two things, you take this, it's banana, you take this, it's cinnamon, and you put them together and you get formaldehyde. Or you get just paint thinner. Or you get something like rusty nails. Sometimes the flavors come together in a weird way that you wouldn't expect. So don't be discouraged by that. I actually briefly got a little bit into home blending probably 2 years ago, maybe 3. And I kind of gave it up because I was like, this is way too hard. And I had just been very unlucky with a couple of the blends that I tried where they just came out tasting terrible. And now as I've revisited it, maybe it has something to do with I've gained a little bit of knowledge in different types of whiskey and things. But honestly, I think it's mostly just dumb luck. This new time, I had a few that worked great, and that's more encouraging. So don't let it discourage you. Just let it be part of the fun. I didn't expect this one to taste like paint thinner, but here we are. Just roll with the punches. The next tip is aging them does make a difference. And so what I mean by aging, quote unquote, is if you blend things in a glass, swirl it around and sip it, it, in my experience, does taste different than if you blend them in a bottle and let that bottle sit for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The flavors mingle together totally differently. So I had this with that Smart Man's Pappy video that I made for YouTube where I got different results with the blind tasting, which I would expect. I would expect like, oh, this palate condition versus that one, for sure. But I also just they tasted different from when I blended them in a glass and tasted them right away versus for the YouTube video, I blended them and I put them in little mini taster bottles and then I left them for like a week and a half, 2 weeks. And that I got a very different result from. So the big thing I want to communicate is usually, especially if you're buying a finished product from a distiller, like a product that is just meant to be consumed, sitting in the bottle doesn't really do anything for it. Usually that's the case. With this, at least what I noticed, especially with that Smart Man's Pappy series, was when you're mixing them together, it does make a difference. And I think that's valid. I think most people would agree with that. I think blenders would probably agree with that as well. Because just chemically giving them a quick swirl in the glass is not the same as letting them get fully commingled together. If you buy a blend at the store, that's already been done. Versus if you are blending it at home, that hasn't been done yet. And I don't know how long it is. I feel like it's probably pretty quick. I feel like if you give it a good shake and you let it set for a day, maybe you shake it again, whatever. I think it'd probably get most of the blending done. You just have to give those compounds time to interact and to come to whatever stable state that they're in. Think of it as doing a chemical reaction. If you pour vinegar into baking soda, then it's gonna make that reaction that we all know about. But Some reactions are slower than that, and so think of it as a really, really slow vinegar and baking soda reaction. Well, if you drink it in the middle of that reaction, not that you'd want to, that'd be disgusting, but you're not getting the finished product. It's still reacting. So you want to give some time for that. Either reaction's probably not the right word. That solution to kind of homogenize, to use I'm big on the big vocab words today. I don't know why. This coffee must really be doing its job. So that's the next thing. That's another big tip, because I always preach, don't let your whiskey age in the bottle. It's pointless. It's going to taste the same. Well, now I'm going to amend that and say if you just blended the whiskey together, then letting it age in the bottle will make a difference. And then the last tip that I will give you, and then we're going to talk about some trials that I've done, and I do have more of the bottles here to show you. But the last thing I want to say is, blending with finishes, with whiskeys that have a type of finish, like a maple syrup finish, a honey finish, a wine finish, a cognac finish, sherry finish. Finishes add a little bit of fun to the mix. Like, they're a little bit more predictable, at least in the ones that I've done. A honey finish is going to bring a honey note to a blend, at least in my experience. And that's one of the ones that I'm actually going to talk about. So finishes are fun, and they also give you a little bit more direction. So maybe if you're discouraged, take like 2 fruity finishes and put them together, and it'll probably react in about the way that you would expect. So keep that in mind as well. So that's my last tip. Now let's talk about a few of them that have worked, because I have had a few work. So I already mentioned, where's it at? I already mentioned Smart Man's Pappy. This here is the Smart Man's Pappy that I have come up with that I think I'm going to drink probably on the regular. So Maker's Mark, just plain Maker's Mark, which ironically enough, I don't like very much. I'm not a big plain Maker's Mark guy. But if you take plain Maker's Mark, which has a little bit of fruitiness, a little bit of sweetness, has that wheated mash bill, so it's kind of approachable. But to me, it has a little bit too much alcohol flavor. You take it, you mix in some Middle West Spirits straight wheated bourbon whiskey, and I did it at cask strength, so I have their cask strength one, and I did the cask strength because you're usually targeting that slightly higher proof when you're doing Poor Man's Pappy. You take like one that has a little bit higher proof and one has a little bit lower proof. That's kind of the pattern that you see with Poor Man's Pappy recipes. So anyhow, I added that in for a little bit of oomph, and I got a sample that tastes vaguely like Pappy. You can kind of see the resemblance. It's not exactly the same, but more importantly, I think it tastes phenomenal. It's got nice body to it. So like I mentioned, the Maker's Mark is nice and sweet, creamy, smooth, but it also has, there's a hair on it that's bugging me if you're watching the video version. It's a piece of the little peel thingy. It also has a little bit of an alcohol to it. And I took it and I added this Middle West, which is cask strength, very bold. Middle West's wheated bourbon, to me, has an orange cola flavor to it. It reminds me of like a cherry Coke. I said orange, I meant to say cherry. I'm sorry. It has a cherry cola flavor to me. It reminds me of a cherry Coke. It has a little bit of an oakiness to it, and it has a body that helps cover up that alcohol flavor that the Maker's Mark has. So by blending these two together, you get this really nice kind of medium-bodied, slightly cherry-flavored, slightly kind of sweet and creamy mix that I personally really, really enjoyed. So that was one of the most successful Smart Man's Pappy recipes. And I did a few different recipes, but I think I'm leaning towards this one the most. I'm going to put it away behind me here. But yeah, so feel free to try it, and that's a 50-50 ratio. So then, this was going to be a video, and I don't think I ever even posted it because the video just didn't have the right vibe to it, you know? Sometimes you record a video and you're like, I don't like the way I looked, or like the way I talked. Like, you could tell I was tired when I recorded this, that kind of a thing. So anyhow, I didn't post it, but I did this combo here. So I did My Lemon Greens Unabridged. This is their volume 3, which has strong red fruit notes to me, like dark red fruit, like almost plummy, strawberry, maybe raspberry, strong body, strong barrel backbone, all of that going on here. And I took it and I said, well, I'm going to add some Starlight. This was an OHLQ exclusive barrel pick that was finished in honey barrels. So it was a bourbon that was then finished in honey barrels. And like I said, I kind of had this suspicion finishes are going to be a little bit more predictable. Well, sure enough, it was. So I had this dark fruit, I add in this bourbon, general bourbon characteristics plus honey, like strong honey notes. And I've learned that I'm not too huge into honey finishes. Well, I added some of this Milam and Green, and it dried it up a little bit. It made it not so insanely sweet, and then it added that fruit, and it was like low key, like a little. I don't know why I just said low key. Whoa, that was. I don't like the way that came off my tongue, but it was a little bit like reminiscent of when you'd take strawberries and sprinkle sugar on them as a kid. Obviously, it's not quite that sweet or quite that mild. It has more punch to it. It's got more backbone, more character. But it had kind of that vibe to it, and I really, really enjoyed that. So this was another one that I would consider a success. It wasn't insane, but it was. I don't know if I would say that the blend was better than like the Milam and Green on its own. But like I mentioned, honey to me is a little bit too strong of a finish on any honey finish that I've had, and so that helped dry this one up. So it's probably about equivalent in my ranking to the Milam and Green. So I thought that was really nice. Let's move on. I've got one left. I hope you can hear me all the way down here. Okay. This one I posted and it did horribly, and that's when I thought, well, blending is just not popular online. I think I'm going to change the way I do the videos, make them a little bit more cinematic for a little peek behind the curtain. But this one didn't do great, but I really liked it. So then I thought, okay, Knob Creek, Jim Beam product, known for having nutty flavor to it. Knob Creek, anything really from Beam is known to have this like nutty barrel component to it. And I thought, okay, well, Cooper's Craft gives me a little bit of a banana flavor. Not as much as Woodford Reserve Double Oaked, but I don't have Woodford Reserve Double Oaked right now. So I thought, well, we're going to go with Cooper's Craft Barrel Reserve instead. So this is the Cooper's Craft 100 proof. And I thought maybe that'll taste like a banana nut muffin. Spoiler alert, it did not. But what's cool is I'm doing the tasting and I'm like, this is definitely still better than these two because, honestly, out of all the blends I've done so far, maybe the most noticeably better than these two because it was more complex, more unique. It had more going on. And at the end, I said, this is like a pecan pie blend. That's what it really reminds me of, is pecan pie. That you get like this general sweet, kind of creamy, what I would call the pie crust from the Cooper's Craft. And then you get that bit of nuttiness from the Knob Creek. And Knob Creek also usually gives me a cinnamon flavor. So you put those two together and it was awesome. I actually was really impressed by it. I'm probably going to do that blend more often. I might even do like a mini bottle with, or like when this Knob Creek gets getting a little bit low, when it gets low enough, I might even just throw in some Cooper's Craft and then just have it on my shelf as a blend. Because I really enjoyed it, especially considering you got Cooper's Craft. I'm pretty sure it's less than $35. I'm pretty sure Knob Creek 9 Year is about $40 if I'm not mistaken. So two relatively affordable bourbons making something that I thought tasted awesome. So that was another winner for me. And then I'll throw all those recipes down below as long as I remember. And I don't have my phone within reach, so hopefully I do remember. I should put those recipes down below. But everything I just said, it was a 1-to-1 ratio. I didn't get it any fancier with them. But like this Knob Creek and Cooper's Craft is a great example of one that I might try to get a little fancier with and try a little bit more out. So all of that is to say, I think home blending is worth doing. I think it's a ton of fun. I think more people should do it. There's also, if you're in the Patreon, there is now a Discord channel for home blending so we can share each other's recipes because I think it is a ton of fun and I want to share more recipes. I want to try more recipes. It just makes it more interactive and, like I said, it kind of empowers the consumer to be like, I'm going to make something now. I'm going to do something with this. So it's a fun thing to do. Do not knock it until you try it, and don't let yourself get discouraged because it is easy to get discouraged because some of them, I talk about all the upsides. I've had plenty that I put together, and I don't even remember some of the ones from 2 years ago, but they were real bad, and I put them together, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this just did not work out at all. So don't let yourself get discouraged. You're going to have a lot of that. Sometimes you put sweet together with sweet, and you get charred bitter oak. Like it just totally depends. Don't let it discourage you. Okay, that's it for home blending. We do have some questions to answer from the Patreons. So from the Patreon page. If you don't know, if you're a patron, you are able to submit your questions, and then I add them to whatever script it is that I am scripting at the time. You submit them right through the Discord. There's a Q&A channel that only patrons have access to. Throw your questions in there, and then I throw them on my next script and answer them on here, which is what we're going to do next. Okay, question number 1. Do baking spices normally correlate to a drier finish instead of oily? So in other words, when you have a whiskey that has a baking spice note to it, does it usually give you a drier, kind of like dries your mouth out finish? So there was a great response to this in that Q&A thread. By the way, I love all that conversation as well. So if you're not a part of the Patreon page, there's also some of that, like answering each other's questions and getting more experience than just me, because like I'm just one guy. I have my own experiences. I could be wrong. But great response to it in there was sometimes, but not always. They actually mentioned how chill filtering can sometimes take some of that body, some of that oily, chewy mouthfeel out as well. So I thought that was a great response. Here's what I would say in my experience. I think I get where this person's coming from with the question, because I think a lot of times when you hear baking spice, you're going to feel that dry. When you hear somebody review something and say, this tastes like baking spice, you're going to feel that dryness. And that's because a lot of times baking spice flavor comes from the barrel. A lot of times you're going to get a strong baking spice from a strong oak. You're going to get some cinnamon. You're going to get some allspice. Not always. You can get it from other sources as well, other things within the process. But a lot of times that happens. If something is too barrely, you also get tannins from it, which give it a dry finish. It gives it that dry, after you swallow it, your tongue feels like it shrivels up a little bit. So a lot of times you can make that correlation, but not always. So you want to be careful. I need to be careful when I'm reviewing to make the distinguishing note. It tastes like baking spice, but it's not very tannic. That is an important distinguishing factor. And some reviews do, some reviews don't. I forget it all the time for sure. So if you're reading a review, focus, hopefully they separately address either the finish, the oily finish, the dry finish, or the tannins, something along those lines, astringency, something to indicate whether or not it's giving that dry, kind of alcohol-y, somewhat bitterness. So it's not always the case, and I think that, like I said, that other response was fantastic. That no, it is not always the case, so don't let it always discourage you, but that is where that correlation's coming from. That's where I think you're getting that idea from, and it's a valid idea, I would say. The next question we have is, are smoky peated scotches going to taste like smoke barbecue as far as smoke goes, or what kind of smoke should I expect? What kind of smoke should I expect? No, I wouldn't say like smoky barbecue. Sometimes maybe, but less so with peated scotch. Some bourbons or ryes that have like a smoky characteristic to it, which is pretty rare, but some of the ones that do, you'll get like a barbecue note to it. Ironically, Blanton's gives me this savory note that reminds me of a smoked like brisket, smoked barbecue. But no, that's not as much what I get from peated scotch. From peated scotch, I get more of a bonfire. So not like smoked meat, more like burning logs, burning leaves even. Like if you've ever had a fire that had a lot of leaves on it, or you've had a neighbor who burned their leaves to get rid of them. Kind of like that, which I know sounds so unappealing, and it's hard to explain that it is appealing. You'll also get some weird notes from peat, right? So it is like, I always call it smoky, but there's also weird things that aren't quite smoke. So there's like an earthiness. You're going to just get like kind of like a dirt type smell, which sounds, all these sound terrible, but I'm just going to get it over with. You're also sometimes going to get rubber bands. Sometimes it's like you put your nose in a thing of Band-Aids, like that. Sometimes it's a little bit medicinal. It kind of smells like medicine. Sometimes you get, I know one of the ones that Ardbeg even puts on their bottle is tarry rope, which is just a fun, weird note to put on there, but it kind of, you kind of see it, you're kind of like, okay, like tar, like, yeah, I get that, like when they just tarred the road a little bit. So you're gonna get all these weird, kind of pungent, kind of earthy notes from it, and I don't want to let that discourage you, because a good peated scotch is gonna blend that in with some citrus and some salt and some black pepper and some things that kind of brighten it up and make it this weird combination that's actually enjoyable for some people. Some people hate it. I think a lot of people dislike it at first and then it grows on them, and some people just hate it permanently. Some people will never enjoy it, and that's totally fine. It's just it's one of those flavors that's so unique that it's like mustard, where you either love it or you hate it. Sometimes you grow to love it, sometimes you always hate it. It just depends. So yeah, don't like force yourself to like peated Scotch, but also don't be discouraged about those weird notes. For me personally, I love peated Scotch because it's so different, and it's kind of like a nice little break from the normal. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. And then the last question is there a trick or technique to get used to higher proof stuff, or do you just go for it? Let me get a drink first. So yes and no. Is there a trick or technique to get used to higher proof? Kinda. One of the things, we did an episode on this where you take something that's really, really high proof and you drink it, and then you drink something that's a little bit lower than it, and the thing that's lower proof tastes a little bit better because it's not quite as offensive. The other trick that I would say is also the tricks that I give for whiskey in general, which is don't take too small of a sip. If you take too small, especially with the high proof stuff, it's just going to evaporate off your tongue, and that's going to give you that horrible burning feeling. Also, don't run away from it. Don't gulp it down super quick. Let your saliva dilute it a little bit. Those tips apply to all whiskey, but they can help you get into the higher proof stuff. Also, the same tip as I give for all whiskey, focusing on the flavor can help. There's other things that you can do, of course. You can also like add droplets of water to lower the proof, get an idea of what flavors it is that you're looking for, and then try it at cask strength, or just buy like a Maker's Mark and a Maker's Mark cask strength, and then you can kind of get an idea of what flavors it is to look for. So all that being said, you don't have to just go for it. So the big caveat, the big asterisk that I want to add to this response is you can jump in the deep end, you can try all those tips, and you might get there faster than somebody else for sure, but you don't have to. I find that you will pretty naturally, whenever the time comes and everybody moves at their own pace, you'll probably naturally start to gravitate towards higher proof stuff. And that is not to say that higher proof is better. I made a video not long ago trying to make that clear, because higher proof is just more flavor and less watered down. But there are low proof options that I sometimes prefer to high proof. I mean, I drink a lot of stuff at about 100 proof. So like there is diminishing returns as well. When you get beyond a certain proof, it's hard to enjoy it even when you're experienced. So I say that to say, like, don't knock stuff that's 90 proof and below, 100 proof and below. There still are plenty of really, really phenomenal whiskeys in that range. Excuse me. And a lot of times you might see that experienced people drink higher proof. Well, they probably do just because they're more used to it, and then they like having that extra flavor. It's a little bit more mouth-watering. And also you'll probably see that higher proof is usually more expensive. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. It's more expensive because it has to be, because it's less watered down. So if you take a barrel at full proof and you get 180 or 200 bottles out of it, well, if you water all that down, you can turn that into 250 bottles. You can turn that into 300. I don't know. It depends on how much you're watering it down. But you can turn it into more. And so then you can charge less for it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's worse. So I just want to make that very clear. But then also, you'll probably gravitate towards higher proof as time goes on, or at least maybe not gravitate towards preferring it, but gravitate towards enjoying it more. You might start to, oh yeah, I really like this high proof one, but I also really like this low proof one. That's kind of where I'm at. Like I love some that are in the 120s, but I love some that are in the 90s. It just really depends on my mood, depends on what I'm looking for. But that ability to taste higher proof stuff will come with time, I would say. You start to get better at tasting flavor notes. You start to get better at not noticing the alcohol because you're so busy noticing the flavor notes. It's kind of like, I think I've compared it before to walking on hot coals, where like if you're walking on hot coals, the coals are still hitting your feet. Like they're still not burning you because you're walking fast enough that they don't burn you, but like they're still causing the uncomfortable thing that when you first started walking on hot coals, in this metaphor, that uncomfortable thing hurt. That's still happening, but you don't notice it anymore. And so that's kind of how it is with whiskey, where like the burn is still happening to your mouth. The same thing is happening, but you don't really notice it as much. It just kind of becomes white noise, and you're so focused on the flavors that you notice that more. So I would say don't rush it. If you want to rush it, those are the ways that I would do it. But don't worry too much about rushing it. You don't really have to. You'll probably just kind of end up there. So that was a much longer answer than I planned to give, but hopefully it was informative enough for you. And if you're a patron and you haven't submitted any questions, please feel free to do so. I love answering your guys' questions, and I will add them at the end of whatever episode I'm scripting. So now there's a much quicker return on Q&As, which I think is a lot of fun. So feel free to go add those questions. If you're not on the Patreon page and you want to add some questions, please consider joining. There's a lot of other really cool stuff over there. But that's all I've got for this episode, you guys. So I will leave you with learn to drink, drink to learn. Hi there. Since you're still here, I'm going to assume that you enjoyed the show, in which case, please just take a moment to leave a 5-star rating or review on whatever platform it is that you get your podcast from. Subscribe to the podcast because that actually really helps out. And also, if you're on YouTube, ring that notification bell. If you really like this show, though, the best way that you can support it is just checking out that Patreon page. It's at the description in the show notes or in the description on YouTube, or you can go to patreon.com/whiskeynoobs. That is the absolute best way to support the show, but also just spreading the word to other people who you think might be interested. I am so grateful for all of the forms of support that you guys give. And please, 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 most importantly, always drink responsibly. Thank you guys all so much. And in case nobody else tells you today, I got to tell you, God bless.